Hello and welcome. My name is Samuel Ray, and with me is my co-host,
Prime, chilling like a villain. How you doing?
And this is CounterPick New Perspectives, a podcast where we try to take a bit more of a varied and logical approach to, different entertainment-related topics, or different topics, and apply them through the lenses of entertainment, that is. We kind of started this podcast because we were tired of hearing a lot of the same opinions on different things, so we figured we'll do it ourselves and start a podcast. This is season 3, episode 5, and the topic of this episode. Okay, so, did the music not? Dang it. Oh well, I'll fix that in post. So, we're still figuring some stuff out.
No?
Nah, no point. Right. It's fine. I'll fix it in post for the re-release.
So last time.
In any case, so the topic for today was kind of inspired by well, it was something I kind of came up with. So essentially, something that I've noticed and experienced people talking about in something I've recently gotten into, which is sim racing games. Kind of started getting back into racing and gave sim racing a try, and there's a commonality that I've noticed in scenes that have very hardcore, niche contingents, and I've seen this before in the Monster Hunter community primarily. And so that was the discussion of immersion, right? Usually immersion through realism, but it kind of, as someone with an outside perspective, because I saw this in the Monster Hunter community when I just came into the series with Monster Hunter Rise. There was a lot of complaints about how they lost a lot of immersion elements in the game design, and I was someone who attempted to get into the series twice in the past before Rise ever released, and couldn't because of said elements. So I was kind of on the other end of the coin, in this case. And then with sim racing, it's kind of a similar thing, where I came from playing games like Need for Speed growing up, particularly with my dad, and with some other friends as well. And those games lean more arcade, right? As well as going to some arcades occasionally and playing games like Crazy Taxi, which is a certified classic. And essentially just had some trouble, figuring out how to balance that in the genre itself. Monster Hunter particularly did for a bit, because those immersion elements that the hardcore niche loved a lot kind of gatekept the series a bit, but not necessarily in a good way, I would say. But before I get into the details on that, Sai, you also came into Monster Hunter not quite at Rise. You actually enjoyed earlier games than I did.
No, yeah, I finished the main game of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate on Nintendo 3DS. So I played a lot more of that than you did. So once again, I am at least partially the contrary opinion here, but I think first on the topic we need to, it's like any philosophical topic, I suppose. One has to first define the terms, right? So when we say immersion, what is immersion?
Okay, that's a good point. So immersion, I've usually seen it defined as that suspension of disbelief, where you feel like you are in the world of the game or movie or book, what have you, where you kind of forget that you are partaking of an entertainment medium, and rather just kind of get lost in it, get caught up in the vibes, the environment, the ambiance. And it does come strongly with a sense of suspension of disbelief, right? Your brain's not constantly thinking of, this couldn't possibly happen. You're just in it. right? You're immersed.
Yeah. So, first of all, like I know where we were already going on the topic before is like some people can be very obsessed with the minutia of like details of realism, but realism and immersion are not necessarily the same thing. Now, realism can be in the service of immersion, but unless the player or otherwise enjoyer of the media form in question has that knowledge already, it isn't necessarily going to be like a necessity for that immersion. For instance, and this is like something that I saw a tweet about, right? Like gun enthusiasts talking about this you know, gun needs to work specifically how it does in real life. Well, the larger number of people playing a shooter aren't going to be that that stringently familiar with real life firearms. Yeah. So absolute realism is not necessarily the same thing as immersion.
Exactly.
And obviously that gets much more obvious when you get into cases like, well, you're playing Monster Hunter, you're talking about a game where you fight giant monsters with giant weapons.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point, because it kind of goes along with my thought process, and honestly, just an objective fact that that realism or realistic is not synonymous with believable. Yes. And I think the key to immersion is, like I said, that suspension of disbelief. The thing you're partaking of has to be believable, not necessarily realistic.
Yep. Because, I mean, likening it to like movies, right? A lot of the time, characters' dialogue are not realistic. In real life, people don't always immediately know what they're going to say. Like, you know, strong example, MCU, right? Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. He always has a comeback every time, but that's not how people actually function.
How they actually speak.
You know, tightly written dialogue, because in real life, the dialogue is not written, and only like the like best of the best of writers can make realistic dialogue that isn't off-putting, because like you said, believable and realistic are not the same thing. If people were stuttering all the time, you know, a lot of people would be like, why are we wasting this time?
It would be hard to follow.
Weird. They're bad actors. What's happening?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have encountered that myself when watching videos or listening to people who are you know, conveying some sort of news, and they're reading a statement and stuttering a lot, and it does make it harder to follow what is trying to be conveyed in said statement that they're reading.
Yeah, if you're prepared, then it should be more smooth, and you know.
And so, yeah, in a lot of entertainment, people speak a lot more smoothly. They take turns, right? Knowing when each other is going to speak instead of accidentally speaking over each other, which is, we know, not realistic. People speak all over each other all the time. You're going to hear it a lot in this podcast, right? Yeah.
So
that's organic.
All that being said, yeah, basically, it's you know, we already said it, like, believable is not the same thing. So
so let's take that to Monster Hunter, right?
Yeah, Monster Hunter. So the main example that always comes to my mind is the hot and cold drinks.
Yes.
Look, yes, it's believable that you would, I mean, it's realistic that you would have to have some kind of preparation against like extremely hot or extremely cold environments, whatnot. But, and I don't doubt that some people enjoy the like sim like focus on you need to be so prepared for all of that. but so and I did enjoy some aspects of the more grounded style of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate.
Yeah,
but
making sure you have the right tools for the target, right?
Yeah, but that was not one of the elements that I enjoyed.
Yeah,
I'm going to be plainly honest.
Well, yeah, it's like in summary, what I always said about it as a mechanic was, if said mechanic doesn't, like, if the failure to interact with said mechanic doesn't detract from the experience, right? Because with the hot and cold drinks, you have to do this thing in order to operate at baseline level.
Yeah, so
capacity.
like what's the result of the mechanic? Well, you have to disengage every, like, what, 5 minutes? I don't know what
Whatever
the exact
cooldown
timer
is.
was, but like whatever the cooldown is, you have to disengage with the monster to go and take a drink again.
Yeah.
And obviously there's also like the whetstones, you know, having to refill your whetstones, you know. And
Just to operate at regular
things,
capacity rather than a debuffed capacity.
Yeah, a lot of these things just boil down to streamlining.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are other cases like the stringent realism of like car sims or shooters or whatnot with the guns that are more about how things look than how things function. But yeah, like a lot of, if you're talking about immersion for the non-super niche, enthusiast, like if you're talking about in general immersion in video games, then it's going to have to do with the mechanics, because that's the main way that you
interact with the game.
Get immersed, interact and therefore get immersed in a video game. It's going to be things that interact with the mechanics. But yeah, some of them can be not necessarily fun. It's like on an extreme example, right? You remember the game QWOP?
What?
There's a game called QWOP.
Okay.
QWOP, QWOP.
I'm not too familiar with that, actually.
Well, basically, you have to do like various track and field events, but you have to control each of the limbs, or like each of the parts of your 2 limbs or whatever, like the legs, independently. And so, like, you technically are controlling more things. Is it more immersive? No, because it's
definitely not.
It's more difficult. So actually streamlining some things, I would argue, could be more immersive rather than less.
Yeah. Okay, you know what I find funny too? To kind of springboard off of your streamlining point.
Yeah.
Streamlining is often actually a very realistic thing. Think about this. Okay, so let's go to the sim racing, right? What does every car, most people, I would say, on the road, do we drive manual? No, we're driving automatic. They've streamlined out manually shifting gears out of the majority of consumer cars, right?
Yeah.
So that in and of itself is a realistic element, right? They streamlined an aspect of driving so that the consumer can focus on a different aspect of driving. Yeah. You reduce one part, right? One mechanically tedious part to enhance a different part. That's actually a very realistic approach to things.
Now, see, the thing is though, on the subject of like immersion and realism, I do to some degree, like, as long as people aren't like haranguing others about it or being like, why don't you care about the things I care about? Like, but if they're being reasonable, I can see people like in something, especially like a racing simulator that, you know, builds itself as a racing simulator. Well, it should be accurate. Like, I can see that.
Yeah.
But then if you're getting into, you know, fictional, like, you know,
like Monster fictional settings,
or like for instance, like Gundam, you know, there are some arcade games that are like you're using the levers and stuff. It's still a bit simplified from what you see in the anime, but like, on the other hand, you know, you have like what's the most recent like Gundam game that you played a bit on like PS4?
On what?
That Gundam game that you played on PS4.
Oh, what was it? Battle Operation, I think.
Yeah. You have Battle Operation, and obviously you're not controlling it with like levers well, I guess like Battle Assault 2 or whatever. Anyway, lots of Gundam games. You know, most Gundam games, you're not controlling it with like levers and switches and doohickeys and bobbins. Like, but you know, does that make it less immersive?
Definitely not.
I don't know. Because like
I would say honestly, Battle Operation is one of the more immersive ones because of how much slower the machines move. They're not like zipping around. You're kind of plodding around like a big hunk of, or what is it, Mech Warrior, right? Where you're basically in a walking tank. I would call that immersive, right?
Also, the immersion has to do with the expectations, right? The expectations based off of what you're going into it from. So like if you're trying to get immersed in like a classic, you know, original Gundam thing, then yeah, you might expect something a little more grounded, a bit possibly slightly clunky, you know, but like weighty. But if you're wanting to get immersed in like a Gundam Seed or Gundam 00 game, well, you're expecting to zip around and do anime stuff. Is it realistic? No, but
you can get immersed.
You know, that's what you're expecting.
Yeah,
you want to be the protagonist.
Like, I know when I played Armored Core 6, I was fully immersed despite playing the game from a third-person perspective and the game not being as mechanically like you know, like the aiming wasn't as clunky as in previous Armored Cores. I was still very immersed in the game because it was more than just the mechanical controls that led to the immersion. It was the act of customizing the mech as I played, you know, and again obtaining money, the story unraveling, my choices affecting the story. All of those elements came in to make a very immersive experience, and I was enraptured from start to finish, you know? So
I guess I've realized what's my continuous repeating term in these podcast episodes, but yeah, it comes down to expectations, right? What you expect to be immersed in. There's also various other things that can help immersion, right? You know, music can get us into vibes.
And we don't have no theme music or ambient music that plays in real life.
Yeah. But like, if I think about that, the first thing I think about is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The understated ambient music, the kind of just, you know, it enhances the like graceful open wilds kind of vibe. It
may not be an earworm like Hyrule Fields, but it enhances the experience and gets you immersed with the serene piano notes hitting every once in a while, you know, that kind of airy ambient feel, and then when you get spotted by a guardian, the piano notes, the like tense piano notes that kick in, that sting. It's like,
sound like you're about to get hit by Vegeta's final flash.
And it just makes you go, oh, right? And that's immersion. Even though it's not realistic in real life. If you're walking down the street and someone's about to run over you with a bike, you don't get no musical stinger that kicks in. Right?
Brutal. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you're not wrong. That's true.
So it's an element of a completely unrealistic element that actually increases the immersion.
Yep.
And that's exactly like, okay, so for example, with my recent, you know, delving into sim racing, I happened to get a game called Project Cars 2, which, by the way, you thought it was a weird name, but CARS is actually an acronym. Community Assisted Racing Simulator.
Okay.
Because it was actually community funded and, you know, kind of designed around by community feedback and stuff.
Okay, it gets a couple points back, but still, it's CARS.
Yeah, it's a wordplay. It's a wordplay. But regardless, I got that I think it was a Humble Bundle a long time ago. So, and I kind of forgot I had it in my library until I recently just, bought a steering wheel and decided to try out some racing sims. And it happens to be one of the titles with the best career mode, single player career mode. So it's a great introduction to kind of ease me into it. Highly customizable. So I had a race, and I recently uploaded a video about it on my channel on YouTube. So I decided to not play manual transmission. I decided to go automatic because, one, that's what I'm used to driving in real life, and I am a really good driver in real life on automatic. So I decided to do that so I could focus more on the other aspects of the racing technique. And so I was able to keep up with the AIs on their default setting rather than having to turn down the difficulty. And I had a race where I was in the lead for the majority of the race, actually from lap 1. But then on the second to last lap, I made a few mistakes, and that allowed second place to pass me. And I got to experience the pressure of having to race perfect while you're in the lead, because you don't have anyone to draft with to speed up. So you have to literally just be on point in order to not get overtaken by the people behind you. Especially if you're far enough ahead that they can't draft you. You have to keep that lead, to keep that distance. I made a couple of mistakes. I got passed up, and then I felt that tenseness of, okay, I have to be solid with my driving right now and get close enough. I have to take, inch up on them by taking the corners better to catch up just enough that I could draft them. And so I managed to do that during the last lap. And then, because I had run the laps enough through the qualifying round and the race itself up till then, I actually understood the track pretty well. And so I was able to catch him on I think it was the third to last corner. And then I just had to drive the last corner, which is an S turn, also known as chicane. I had to run that perfectly, but I had to do it efficiently without going off track, because if all 4 wheels go off track, you get a time penalty. So you can finish first but have more penalties than the person in second and lose to them. That's how the penalty system works. So even though I passed him up, I still had to keep my technique up. But I was able to pull it off, and it was actually really thrilling despite running lower horsepower cars. The aspects around the race, despite the fact that it's not like the most hyper-realistic of the racing sims, apparently, from what I've read. And I was racing automatic instead of manual, but I was fully immersed. I was also playing in VR, which helped.
Yeah. But
I was fully immersed in that moment, and I had that eureka moment of, I get it now. I get the appeal. The thrill. Like, I get it firsthand. And so it wasn't hyper realism that made that immersive. It was the other aspects around the art of racing, right?
Okay.
Some of which was streamlined by racing automatic.
Right. I mean,
and the car that I was driving, I think, had automatic brake system, to prevent brake lockup, and I think it had a measure of traction control. All of which, on like the hyper realistic high horsepower racing, you don't have either of those. If you're doing it the realistic way. And so by taking out some elements of realism, I had a better experience, and guess what? It became my gateway into sim racing. So now I'm more invested because I got to experience that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes less realism to create more immersion to get people invested, and then who knows, maybe they will progress to the more realistic, more niche portion of that. Right? The more eclectic or underrated aspects of the genre, the hobby, the IP, or franchise, what have you. And that's important. It really is. It's not something it's not to be understated, So like, let's say, for example, Monster Hunter Rise. Yeah, a lot of people who liked Monster Hunter World and who liked the Monster Hunters before Monster Hunter World, so Generations Ultimate and 4 Ultimate and back, they don't like the newer entries. A lot of them don't like the newer entries, like World and Rise, but more streamlined, but still very immersive games like World and Rise can become a gateway for people to get curious about the older entries,
well,
the more realistic ones.
So I would actually contest one element of what you said there, because I would say that Monster Hunter Rise is very clearly not as immersive as prior Monster Hunters, but I would, I think we've had this sort of floating in the conversation, but I'm just gonna say it. Immersion is not always equal to fun.
Oh yeah, good point.
And now, obviously, me being the more of the contrarian, again, I did enjoy the 4 Ultimate style as well as Monster Hunter Rise.
Yeah.
So I can see, and we've talked about this before, I can see some of the
gripes
being made, and like if they enjoyed like
and I get it too
once more, because it's more the fact that you couldn't necessarily just go in gung-ho as easily as you can in Monster Hunter Rise. Like,
yeah, for sure.
I have never found myself using bombs and like waiting for the monsters to go back to their lair and doing a whole setup with bombs and stuff in Monster Hunter Rise. But that was
True.
like a bread and butter thing of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate.
Oh, okay.
And while paintballs weren't necessarily a streamlined way to like track the monsters, and it's easier with the Kohoots giving a reason for being able to just have them on the map whenever they come in. There was an element of like, I feel like a legitimate tracker, a hunter, when I like I'm going into the area, looking around, I spot the thing, it's attacking, whatever, dodge, paintball, move to get away, and then it goes away back to its lair. I'm like, all right, now time to put the plan in action,
Yeah. True.
So
I can see that there would be an appeal to that.
So I would
slower,
say,
more methodical.
in Monster Hunter Rise, it doesn't have as much of that hunter feel of the Monster Hunter Rise. It's more action game.
Yeah, that's true, and I completely get that too, because like I've been on the inverse end of that with the fighting game genre, right? Which have been heavily streamlined to quicker get players to the offense, right? Which is what most people find fun.
Yeah, but so
I get it.
So now, going off the back of your sort of immersion experience, though, like what elements would you say support immersion for you? Because like we've gone through like, okay, realism that can support immersion,
For me personally,
music, but like what else are elements toward that,
Okay, so for me, there's one big thing that really gets me immersed into something.
All right.
Flow. Yeah, which could be kind of, so you could expand that to like things like pacing, right? Or and intuitiveness. The ability to find a good rhythm, right? And so that applies across multiple different things in different ways, like different forms of entertainment. So with games, which is kind of the bread and butter of this channel, that includes things like well, I guess in the case of that race, right, it was, since I had run the track multiple laps through the practice, qualifying, and then the final race, it was that feeling of gradually getting better and better as I'm running those laps. Or let's say in a Sonic game, right, it's that feeling of hitting that good flow through the stage's level design, by having the a sufficient knowledge of how the game plays, and then the tells in the level design, what to look out for. And when you hit that really good flow, like you've been playing Sonic Adventure 2 on stream on your channel,
Yeah.
And you remember that from our, you know, us growing up, our childhoods, how good like the speed stages feel when you hit that great flow, right?
Yeah.
And
I think I was getting tripped up by the jank a little more now than I was back then. I was more used to it back then.
true, because it was exposure. We were still playing it a lot back then.
Yeah.
Especially just to get the stuff for the Chow Garden. But yeah, replaying the same stages over and over.
And things like the homing attack as well aren't nearly as generous in the older games as they are in modern games. But
yeah, in the modern games, if you have the reticle, it'll work, basically. Back then, you had to kind of feel it out because there was no targeting reticle.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah. So it's flow and it's rhythm, right? Like when I was at the height of enjoying fighting games, it was that finding that rhythm with the opponent, right? The dance of the fight, kind of trying to find the patterns in their behaviors and then capitalizing on them. And then once you capitalize on them, then shifting into my own offensive flow, you know? And
now, as far as
flow is a huge part, because if I get into the flow, I'm not even, you know, to the point where I'm like just playing without really having to think too hard, right? I'm able to go off of intuition and feel. Then I'm fully immersed. All the aspects of my brain are engaged. I am fully immersed in what I'm doing, and I think that also comes from my tendencies, you know, as someone with Tourette's syndrome, that hyper-focus tendency. So if I am fully engaged and hitting that flow, then it's just the peak of immersion for me. And it doesn't matter if it's not realistic, it's that flow that creates the immersion. Like in some of my favorite fights in Armored Core was when I got the download and I start hitting that, you know, dodge, counterattack, or dodge, shoot, stagger, go in for the big attack kind of flows. You know, it had those sequences that you can create with the different parts they had equipped. It's just that flow, and part of that is it hinges on intuitiveness. You know, if something is too obtuse and overcomplicated, right, it breaks that flow and it takes me out of the game, and that's when I stop having fun. That's why Tekken was always a bit harder to get into that than or Guilty Gear, right, where you have so many moving parts, too many moving parts, almost too many mechanics, to the point where it breaks my immersion and my flow.
I have a wrench to throw here.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I was thinking of this right before we started, right? Mm-hmm. When I was getting the topic back in my head. I think, would it be arguable that there are genres of game that don't even go for immersion at all? And that this is why
sure.
I tried to define immersion, because I think of fighting games as a genre of game that doesn't go for immersion. Now you get into it, right? You get pumped up, whatever, but like you're not getting the experience of fighting necessarily. Anyway, like I don't know. It depends on how you define immersion.
I think the immersion of fighting games is when you're like fully mentally engaged in that dance with your opponent, where you're basically talking to each other through your actions in the game. You know, what they call the conversation between the players.
Then if you're defining immersion that way, then like that's just what any like getting into the game. I don't think that's necessarily, because you said at the beginning when we tried to define immersion, right? Mm-hmm. This is suspension of disbelief. There's no suspension of disbelief in playing a fighting game.
Yeah, fair point. Kind of like in chess, there's no suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, you don't imagine yourself on a battlefield. No, you're moving the funny little pieces around. It's
fair point.
You know, that's why there's a distinction for me between, you know, the dictionary definition of immersion, right, being like mentally engaged with something, and the term immersion as we use it with fictional media, you know, right, or entertainment media rather.
But then again, I have heard the term immersed as being like with games as being like when you're getting when you're really engaged with the gameplay loop to the point where you're not really thinking about it in terms of like,
yeah, but that's not suspension
like the
of disbelief.
mechanics. Fair point. So interesting. I do believe the suspension of disbelief aspect applies mostly to passive media, like movies, you know, where you're the spectator, right? Movies, books, TV.
Yeah, that's true.
When you add the aspect of being a participant, like with games, then you can't really have immersion without engagement. Otherwise, that's why a lot of people do complain about like these games with these very ambitious stories, but they're like, you know, so many cutscenes that take control away from me. It takes me out of the game, and therefore their immersion is broken. It doesn't matter if it's such a deep story. You know, there are people who like games like I don't know, your story games like your Horizon Zero Dawns, your Modern God of War, or whatever. That you know, they're just like too many cutscenes, you know, too much hand holding. It just takes me out of the game.
That's fair.
Too many pace breakers, stuff like that. Even that's why pace is pretty important, because like when you have those pace breakers, like shimmy through this tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah,
there was an article or something about that.
Yeah, and you know, that takes some
video talking about like quote hidden loading screens.
Yep, that was the video.
Yeah. Okay, we both saw it.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like it's a pace breaker, yeah. And for some people, I also think it does depend a bit on your personality type too, and like you said, your expectations, what you want out of it, your values out of a particular piece of medium. Because for some people, having too much gameplay density, too much nonstop action without anything to break that, you know, no pace breakers, is overwhelming, right? It's overstimulating. But then and that becomes mentally taxing, right? But then for someone like me, if there's too much dialogue, too many cutscenes, and not enough gameplay, which is why I can't get into most mobile games, right? Because they are mostly dialogue, menuing, and then little bits of gameplay here or there, right? Like Zenless Zone Zero or those types of corridor combat games where it's just, you know, you're going through you move through a grid or whatever, and then you get encounter, maybe 5 minutes of action gameplay at most, then back into dialogue and more menus, more dialogue, you know, moving through whatever gameplay. A snippet, you know, I'm someone who actually needs more density of gameplay to get immersed. If it's too, you know, having a few cutscenes sprinkled about, but the overwhelming majority of the playtime sitting at my desk, you know, or with the game on, is gameplay, that actually helps me get immersed. And I think that's why old Monster Hunter, it felt too tedious, right? The preparation aspect, the tedium of certain realism elements like the hot and cold drinks, you know, mechanics that if you don't interact with them, they become an inconvenience to you, or the debuffs happen. That all is counter to immersion for me, unfortunately. It takes me out of it.
I would also say sometimes, and I think it depends on what kind of person you are.
Very much, yeah.
The aspects that are tedious, like there's a certain kind of fun for some people that is not based on
action
fun, if that makes sense.
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
like,
fair point. Like there's people who, well, because unfortunately we're in such a topic of subjectivity here, because there's like there's people who like those Chores type games, right?
But it's also like Dark Souls, you know. So some of it is about getting beaten down until you succeed.
Until you get the download. Yeah. I mean, that's fighting games as a whole, right? Starting as a newbie in a fighting game, that's literally the loop.
Is most of it fun? Maybe not. But the whole can be larger than the sum of its parts.
True.
You know, so the
Yeah,
difficulty
you know
can be worth the catharsis.
Yeah, like think about something like I don't know, power wash simulator. You're sitting there washing a thing. The act of washing itself may not necessarily be riveting, right? Some people actually enjoy it because it's more of a zen kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
they can turn brain off, do thing,
Relax.
and just relax while they're doing this tedious thing. But then when they complete the whole, you know, the whole of that stage, that project, then they get the satisfaction of you know, the job well done and the progression that comes from it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get you there. Honestly, I never really got into those kind of things. Again, a little too dull for me. My brain gets too distracted because of, you know, well, Tourette's mimicking ADHD in that way. So like I get bored if it's like that. I do think that racing and driving games, I do sometime want to try out American Truck Simulator, since I got it for like $2 on sale during the summer sale. You did as well, but I want to try it with my steering wheel sometime, because it's strange for me. The act of driving in itself, I actually like driving. I like driving long distances, even in real life, because it engages my brain without me having to think too hard about it, because it is a very intuitive action for me. So like, yeah, it's strange, because like when I'm driving long distances, I'm not thinking hard about, you know, everything that's around me, while still being very aware, you know, having a lot of spatial awareness and the micro adjustments on the steering wheel. And, you know, my car doesn't even have what's it, what is that feature called? Cruise control. My car doesn't even have cruise control, so I have to manage the gas pedal myself the whole time. But I've always enjoyed driving, because then I can do things like listen to music, listen to podcasts, half listen to either while thinking about other things, and not be so distracted that I'm going to hit something. So it's just, there's something about the act, right, itself, that is kind of zen for me.
Well, I mean, I think that's exactly how people are with Power Wash Simulator, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think I get it on that.
I can't say I generally enjoy driving per se. Like I will enjoy, like, whenever I've had like night work, you know, or evening work shifts, you know. I will kind of enjoy like
a short drive home,
a cool night breeze, you know, drive home. But like, all in all,
that's like a 10-minute drive and you're done.
Driving specifically is something I enjoy like that. But in games, it's been a while since I've turned on Breath of the Wild, but I enjoyed sometimes, you know, just like riding the horse through those fields like that. Sometimes I would actually choose not to fast travel and just,
or ignore, you know, some of the hold-the-minute moments.
Well, but like I knew exactly where I was going, and there might not have been any like things to look at or like, you know, hold up a minute on between those two spots, and I could have fast traveled, but sometimes I just would be in the mood to, like, I just want to ride the horse there instead.
Yeah, I get you there. I was that way in the Sonic Frontiers. I enjoyed, you know, sprinting across the island instead of just fast traveling to whatever, you know, if I had a Coco scroll or could fast travel to the portals. I mean, I just preferred running across the map.
Sonic Frontiers is a little different though. The maps are much smaller and you're much faster.
Yeah.
So it's not as much vibes and you know, graceful wilderness.
True.
Yeah.
It was still very enjoyable, but yeah. But yeah, no, I get you there. I think So what we were getting at then is immersion isn't always.
Oh, yeah, where are we at?
Well, you said immersion isn't always about fun, right? For most people.
Yeah, depending on the person.
Yeah, for some people. And so I think that is definitely more the like the audience for the racing sims, right? Their fun comes from the mastery of the realistic racing physics and handling of the cars, and the difficulty of racing high horsepower cars that don't have much in the way of anti-lock, brake lockup and traction control to help prevent spin outs. It's that act of being able to finesse a powerful automobile machine, right? With skill, and then able to do that while also quickly traversing a track that they've mastered through time and practice.
Yeah, and I also understand in other ways the mindset of like, okay, this or that must be just so, right? It's not in the same ways, but like not necessarily even, I guess sometimes this might sound crazy, but I think sometimes satisfaction can be a different thing from fun. Like,
true,
sometimes like just having a stack of things like all the same way and like organized or whatever, like, you're not having fun reorganizing things, but you can do a thing and then step back and look at it and be like, be kind of satisfied that it's like that.
Hey DK, welcome. Yeah, we're talking about the concept of immersion in entertainment. But yes, you remind me of what's it, that game A Little to the Left, where it's all about just organizing things.
Yeah, like, is organizing things fun?
It depends. For some people, it actually is.
I would say no. I would say no. But you can look back at your work and be satisfied.
That's true.
Those are different things.
That's true. True.
And I think like it's similar that, like gun nerds, for instance, they're not going to have fun necessarily looking at like a gun recreated in a shooter or whatever, and looking like, oh, the shells, whatever they do. I'm not a gun person, but they'll be satisfied seeing it be just so.
Right.
And conversely, be unsatisfied when it's not, if they know exactly how it should be. Fair
enough. And it is very subjective, I think, because some people might find certain things fun, like me in fighting games, right? I actually enjoyed having iron wall defense and then finding the gap in what the opponent's doing and then punishing them for it. Whereas majority of people don't find blocking fun, right? They find it as the thing preventing them from having fun. Whereas for me, I'm like iron walling out an opponent and preventing them from being able to actually, get their game plan started, and then punishing them for overextending. I find that very satisfying and part of the fun of fighting games.
I don't necessarily
like that tournament, tournament match in Tekken 7 where I was, back when I was playing Jin, I was blocking this Miguel's, staggered pressure, and once I locked on to, I heard someone behind me is like, oh, he doesn't know how to deal with the pressure. And once I locked on to a specific pattern and a gap that I could identify visually, then once I got the punish in there, I reversed the momentum of the fight, and he wasn't able to start that kind of pressure on me again for the whole rest of the match, and I won the set. And that was so fun to me.
Yeah, see, I'm not sure if it's just a difference in how we describe it or if it's genuinely a difference in how we think, but I don't think of like that kind of thing, like blocking and like, surviving through a mix-up or whatever, like I don't see that specifically, like that one element of a fighting game match as fun. It's a step towards the fun, like accomplishment. It's a step toward an accomplishment, and the accomplishment is winning. Now there are other things in the game that can be fun to pull up, but for me, the things that are fun in a fighting game are more about when I'm able to do things. So I guess I'm well, I expected, I would be closer to the general crowd on that.
Yeah.
That's who I am on this podcast. I'm part-time voice of the people. But
because for me, the fun is getting the read on the opponent and then counterplaying their action, right?
I mean, I'm also just a person who's naturally competitive. I enjoy being better than others at things.
Right.
God, that sounds so.
Also, real quick, thank you so much for subscribing to the YouTube channel, Laser OP.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, it's.
I feel like we're slipping.
We're going in circles a little bit here. So fun is subjective. Immersion isn't always about fun. It's more about things like suspension of disbelief, particularly in spectator type stuff, flow, intuitiveness.
It's kind of like paradoxical in a way, because for instance, this isn't anything I've ever done, but people enjoy haunted houses, right? Why? Because of the vibe, the immersion of the atmosphere and stuff.
Even though none of it's real.
To be scared? Not necessarily, but they have fun with the experience. So ironically, an immersion that is not about fun then creates an experience which is fun. It's like fun in retrospect.
Oh, I see.
It's delayed fun.
Yes, so that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because in such an experience, right, ain't none of it real, ain't nobody actually out to get them, but it's the immersion that makes the experience, right, not the realism of it.
There's also a whole thing of theories about why people enjoy horror or being scared. It's like
I've never been the kind of cared for it.
Being able to safely experience
the feeling of danger without actually being in danger.
That's the general idea of things like that.
I guess I can get that, because part of the reason why
similarly Dark Souls would be that kind of thing, but not necessarily for being scared, but like being in a hopeless situation or seemingly hopeless situation and then coming out on top,
right, having the odds so heavily stacked against you.
That's not something you experience a lot in your normal everyday life, right? But this is that's video games, right? Experiencing
conflict,
a codified microcosm form of an experience that you can't often get in real life.
Pretty much. And that's the thing though, right? In order to that makes sense though, because what the thought process that made me kind of decide to actually act on what was in the past a passing interest in sim racing, what caused me to actually dip my toes in was, I guess, the fact that with my current job I don't drive much because I live so close to it, to my place of work, so I don't get to enjoy driving much anymore. And then recently when I had an appointment, right, that was further away, and I enjoyed the drive. It was about a half-hour drive. And the thing is, with this, I'm like, you know what? As good of a driver as I am, as good of a driver in real life as I am, and as much as I enjoy driving, I probably would enjoy race car driving if it weren't for the fact that it's so dangerous. And obviously I have reasons I can't do things that have a high risk of injury, right? Personally,
no, we are very risk averse.
We're very physical injury averse. But also I have, other people that I have to think about too with regards to that, and my livelihood and my hobbies and just everything hinging on not getting certain parts of my body injured. So sim racing is literally the only way to, the next best thing, right, to experiencing racing without actually putting myself in any kind of risk of physical harm, physical injury. right? And I think it's the same with fighting games, right? You kind of get an not necessarily an emulation of it, because I would say that you'd have to do some VR stuff, right? To have anything close to an emulation of martial arts or fighting, but you get a substitution of certain elements of it, right? The mental and the strategic elements, the tactical and the technique type elements, without actually being in any kind of danger of harm.
Yeah.
So it's a similar thing. In a way, it's almost a form of vicarious experiencing. Experience something vicariously.
Yeah.
Through some form of simulation. And that's okay. And that's another thing. I don't think simulation inherently means one-to-one with reality, because we already know, no matter how accurate a simulation is to reality, it's never going to be 100% one-to-one. It's just not possible for a human being to perfectly simulate reality. There's always going to be something that's off. Even in the racing sim world, from what I've been seeing through my research and reading up on the different titles, is that two different titles in a sim racing genre can have very different feel for the physics, for the way that the cars interact with just going over a curb, your tires going over a curb. Obviously the height of the curbs matter and stuff, and just the act of braking. Like, some games have a thing called trail braking, where I think you have to lightly brake over a further distance with like a gradual increase to the brake, and then others you actually want to just brake hard, like full on, and then release the brake and then corner, and it changes the way you drive to the minute level, to the micro level. And those are both considered simulators, but neither of them are exact to reality, right? Some people who have experienced really racing GT3 cars say that the game, one of them that's dedicated to that type of car class, is more realistic than another. But other people will say, well, but this other one is more fun. And that's a case where the realism doesn't quite matter so much to the fun, right? And the immersion.
I mean, they're still all simulations, though.
Yeah,
but
they're simulations, but no simulation is perfect, and therefore sometimes I do stand by the fact that the pursuit of perfect simulation is a fool's errand. You want to create a good feel, a good game feel. You can't neglect game feel. Sometimes you do have to sacrifice small elements of realism to get that game feel, like in Monster Hunter. Getting rid of the hot and cold drinks. It definitely, we both consider that a net gain.
Yeah,
wholeheartedly.
Like, while I can understand some element, like missing some elements, hot and cold drinks are the one that's like, no, get it out. Like, I can see like bringing back the paintballs and getting rid of the Kahoot system,
right.
But hot and cold drinks, no.
And Wild seems like it's going to. I think they're bringing back the scout flies from Monster Hunter World, which had more of a tracker element, because remember, you would go and, we never played it, but in my understanding, the way it worked was you would find things like footprints or tracks of their signs of their interaction with the environment, like ones with tusks scraping against trees and stuff. Just different things depending on the species that you're hunting. That helps you to track it down like a real hunter does, but obviously simplified. And as you find enough things, then eventually the scout flies basically get a lock on its scent, and then they'll guide you the last leg of the way to where it is. Okay. So you're gradually tracking, and then once you get enough data, boom, scout flies are like, okay, they're up here, and they'll, you'll run for just a little bit, like a minute or so, and then you'll find it. So they still streamlined it down from Monster Hunter or Generations Ultimate and back, where you had to know things, like you had to have meta knowledge, right? You had to have like, okay, the monkey-like one, right? You had to go to where there was the vine canopy is most likely where you were going to find it, right? You had to know about the species in order to know where you could find it on the map.
Right.
Which is a more realistic aspect of hunting, but is it necessarily fun? I would venture to think most people said no, considering how when they streamlined that in World and Rise, those two games became the highest selling in the series, right? More people bought into it when they streamlined the realism into being more of a, you know, intuitive and satisfying game flow and game feel. World became their biggest, it is still the biggest selling entry in the whole franchise, with Rise, I think, being second.
But you know, cases like those you know, older Monster Hunter games, though, like I think there's an element that maybe you don't necessarily care about as much, but like it's the sort of the fantasy of like being the guy, you know, like like I'm the hunter, you know, I know things, and like it sounds so stupid, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I've sort of
like I know about the species, so I have an idea where it could be. Yeah,
the like quicker version of an experience of like getting this kind of experience throughout a period of time. Like, I know how to find a is.
I like how you go to Crocodile Dundee accent every time.
That's my hunter voice, okay? Like,
but yeah, I think the way World did it was a good balance, though, because like you're hunting an Anjanath, right? So it's like, okay, here's a footprint, here's some leftovers from its meal, here's, you know, like some bones from its last meal, here's a tree it scraped up against, you know, part of it's missing here. Okay, it's obviously in that direction, so you kind of keep going in that direction. You find another thing or two, and then it's like scout flies get the scent. Like, I think that's a pretty good way to do it. You still get that feel, but it's not tedious, right? It doesn't overstay its welcome. And so I wouldn't mind playing a Monster Hunter that's more like that, and I get the feeling they're going in that direction with Wilds, like I said earlier.
I've never actually played Monster Hunter World. I've only played I've only played 4 Ultimate and Rise, so I haven't experienced like the Scout Fly and
right.
That.
Yeah, but yeah, I was gonna say something and I completely forgot. Dang. Okay. I do think that what you said earlier, and what you often say, is the expectation does matter. And I think it is important for whoever is making the experience to properly set that expectation, right? And I think that is where a lot of the issues come from too. Like, oh no, I saw some people trying to say that the title Monster Hunter itself sets a certain expectation, and then when you reduce the hunting, you know, mechanics, they said, well, this isn't really Monster Hunter, this is Monster Slayer.
No, I get that. I mean, that's so, exactly what I said earlier about the... Yeah,
obviously they're picking on semantics, but they're picking on semantics, but I kind of get it.
They have a good point. They have a good point.
But then from what I've seen in the sim racing genre, with some people who are very, you know, realism over game design, so to speak, right? I think that their expectations may be a little skewed, because even though the genre is called racing sim, okay, so you take the genre called racing sim, right? Now, what is one of the most, I'll tell you what one of the most popular titles in the genre is called. Assetto Corsa.
Okay.
Now, I think that's like Italian or French or something, but yeah, I think it's Italian.
Definitely Italian. It's not, that's not French.
But for most people who don't speak that language and know exactly what that says, that doesn't set the same expectation as Flight Simulator 2024, right? Yeah. Flight Simulator tells you what it is. Flight Simulator. It's not a video game, it's a simulator, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then you go and I don't know, let's say Gran Turismo 7, right? It's not racing simulator, it's Gran Turismo. right? It's a bit different. I think that's essentially like similar in definition to like Grand Prix, you know.
I guess so.
And so it's one of those things where I think if the titles matter so much in setting expectations, a lot of racing sims titles aren't necessarily like saying flight simulator, you know, like like for example, you take Flight Simulator and you put that next to Project Wingman. Project Wingman is a flight game, but it's a game with real elements of realistic you know, fighter jet piloting. It's still a game despite having elements of realism, right? The realism doesn't outweigh the game design in it, right? So
Right.
and the titles, you know, Flight Simulator tells you everything you need to know. I mean, heck, even one of the recent ones, Rennsport, which just means motorsport in, it might be Italian. Well, no, it's German, I think, Rennsport. But yeah, that doesn't inherently mean it's just a motorsport simulator, right? Because then you have things that are clearly more the middle ground between arcade racing game and simulator, like Forza Motorsport, but it still feels like a game. There's actually in-game progression, there's, you know, elements of realistic driving, but not so much that it overpowers the game design. And so expectations do matter. Yes, I do think sometimes people's expectations are misplaced, and that is the fault of little other than their own in most cases. In other cases, maybe the title of or whatever was a little misguided, or the way something was marketed, right? Like I think people were upset with Project Cars 3 because it was marketed as a racing sim, but it was closer to games like Forza and Gran Turismo rather than a full-on hardcore simulator.
I mean, also some titles, like for instance Project Cars, still give off of a vibe of
the focus is the cars.
Yeah, like a simulatory vibe.
Right. Yeah. But I think too, at the same time, as a genre, I think you can't expect realism out of any game genre per se, because there's, as a product, they're still games. If they were just simulators, like the general public doesn't really know squat about Flight Simulator, right? That's appeal of that is solely its niche, right? The knowledge of it and the appeal of it is solely flight enthusiasts, right? Aircraft enthusiasts, realistic aircraft enthusiasts. It doesn't go beyond that niche, right? In terms of recognition and stuff. But the title can't always, like Street Fighter, right? Is it really just about street fighting? You know what I mean? If anything, all the fights are kind of just, a lot of the fights are in an arena, really. The heart of it, of fighting games, is just competition. Street fighting isn't necessarily competition, right? That's a street brawl, if you think about it. So yeah, I think the genres too, like, because a lot of these, they're meant to be like vehicles for players, right? And so, like with Flight Simulator, you cannot play that with a controller outright. You can't play it with a simplified flight stick type controller. You have to have the full thing, right? It inherently has a higher barrier to entry. You have to have all of the inputs that are required to fly whatever air vehicle, you know, that you're trying to fly. And so I think simulators themselves need to have an inherent higher barrier to entry too. That way those expectations are not mistakable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, because you pick up, I mean, heck, Assetto Corsa Competizione. It literally is on consoles. It's a racing sim on consoles. It's made to be able to interface with a regular controller.
Right.
That in and of itself makes it not a full-on 100% sim, right? Because a full-on 100% racing sim would require a steering wheel controller with sufficient, you know, stuff, the gear shifters and
being a simulator doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be one-to-one, you know,
like I said earlier.
Yeah, simulation just means like imitation of a situation or process. Now it can be more or less you know, close as a simulation.
Yeah, and there's definitely a spectrum for that, I would say. Some that try to veer closer to realism, others that try to veer closer to being a game. But it never will you have something that's 100% a sim, like I said earlier, right? It's an imitation. It's kind of a vicarious substitute experience of the thing, right? You can get flight simulator and the required peripherals without needing to have a flying license, right? An aircraft license.
Yeah.
So it's definitely one of those things where I think the immersion of the experience, though, of doing stuff like that, realism matters to an extent, but not the full extent. Like, and sometimes you can, and sometimes you should sacrifice a bit of realism for more believability. Because, like you pointed out earlier about the dialogue in movies and TV, right? And even books and whatever. People don't speak in shows, TV, anime, movies. People don't speak like that in real life. They talk over each other, they stutter, they stop mid-thought or mid-sentence. But that would make for a worse experience.
Make a point.
But it would make a worse experience, a worse viewing experience, and actually take people out of it if you were to have them talk, if you had dialogue in an entirely realistic fashion.
Yeah, it takes a lot of you know, a lot of fine crafting and talent, and also the right kind of movie to make something like that, like aiming for
actually work
realism in that way, actually work.
Like the example you showed me of what was it, in the Daredevil live action show, the argument between Daredevil and Punisher, how they actually would interrupt each other and escalate their volume to cut each other off. That was really realistic, but it was executed well enough that you could still follow it. They were, once one started yelling a little louder over the other, they didn't just start and turn into discordant sound that couldn't be parsed right? By anyone. A shouting match.
And there's also like, it's not a movie I've seen, you know, but it's like one of the most famous examples of this. I believe the movie is called Marriage Story with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson.
Oh yeah. Okay, I've not watched it either, but I've seen clips.
Videos talking about it. Yeah, it's very interesting. But because like the point is showing like the raw, the sometimes ugly, you know, struggles in life, right? And so that emulation of realistic dialogue, where sometimes they aren't even making a point because they get to the point where they're so angry that they're just shouting because they're angry. Like, it has to have the right kind of you know, subject matter, kind of the right kind of movie and stuff to get to make something like that work.
That makes sense.
As well as the right execution. Yeah,
like for example, like with voice acting, right? That Sonic Adventure 2 voice acting. How about that? That
hey,
really.
Knuckles, watch it. We're gonna crash.
Yeah, or you don't know when to quit, do you? What are you talking about? That emerald's mine. The Master Emerald. It goes into exposition.
Well, that's just that's poorly done, unrealistic dialogue. But yeah, that's another thing. But
yeah. What are you talking about? The emerald's mine. Got that? The Master Emerald has the ability to do like what's that have to do with anything right now when someone's trying to steal it from you?
Why are you explaining this to Rouge?
Why are you explaining what a thing can do? That
I do not understand why you explain use of large gem to
she's trying to steal.
Trying to steal gem.
Exactly. It's like it was just so unimmersive, right?
But yeah, that's a little bit of a side road.
But it was, it's a good example of like anti-immersion, right? It takes you out of it, and you just can't help but laugh at it.
I mean, it's like a 4 square chart there.
Yeah. Oh heck.
Realistic, unrealistic, immersive.
The room.
Unimmersive.
The room. And nobody get immersed in that.
Well, that's just both unrealistic and unimmersive.
Yeah.
Like we're just getting onto side roads of like this was just not well done.
Okay, so let's
in a way, but
so to bring us home then.
Yeah.
Let's get into an opinion part of this.
Okay. All right.
Let's get divisive. For you, how important is immersion in your enjoyment of something? Does the immersion matter more than, like, is immersion necessary for you to enjoy a game or a movie or a show?
I would say no, because this is the way that I think of it. Mm-hmm. Enjoyment comes first, and immersion can add to it.
Okay, interesting way of putting it.
If I'm not enjoying something, then I'm not going to be able to get immersed in it.
Okay, yeah, like Reggie Fils-Aimé, right? If it isn't fun, why bother? Regarding games.
So, and like for instance, you've seen, it, like me watching a movie or whatnot. Like, I am an analytical person, but if I'm enjoying the movie enough, the like logical holes or whatever like things that I might notice in that way, those will come after the movie ends.
Right.
If I'm not enjoying the movie enough, I will think of those while I'm watching the movie.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, like we weren't sitting talking about or pointing out the plot holes in, what was it, Avengers Infinity War.
Yeah,
we were immersed in the experience.
Like if you're on the edge of our seats. Like classic Star Wars, the original trilogy, like no one ever thought while watching the original trilogy, why are there explosions in space?
Great example.
We all thought about it afterward.
Yeah, great example.
If a sci-fi movie is bad, you will notice while you're watching the movie.
Actually, yeah, I've seen a video that actually showed, like, demonstrated what the space dogfighting scenes would be like if they were realistic, and it was literally just no sound.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, the sound is another thing, but also,
the explosions would just be like
where there is no oxygen.
Yeah, it would be like the flames would immediately implode on themselves.
It just gone.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? Yeah, the unrealistic aspects of the cinematography made it more enjoyable, more immersive. That's a case, actually, a very clear case in film where realism would run counter to immersion.
Yeah, something has to be good first, immersive second.
There you go.
I would say
that. I like that. I would say I agree completely. I get that. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You have to earn the immersion, essentially.
Yeah,
the quality has to earn the immersion. So
I'm
like,
also
if I'm sitting there, because okay, you know what? Let me say one thing. Because wait, no, you finish your thought and then I will expand upon it.
Well, I was just. This might be a different thing I was going to say, but like, I don't think I'm the type of person that has as high a capacity of suspension of disbelief as some other people do. Like, like VR, for example. There's so many videos on YouTube of like, oh, this person like jumped into a wall, or like because they forgot it wasn't real. Like that. Now, like the only time that's ever happened to me, actually, incidentally, was like it wasn't as crazy as that, but like when I was trying out the VR in Project Cars, and I tried to reach to one of the like console buttons in one of the cars or whatever, I'm like, oh well, I can't touch it. But like I've never, you know, if I'm like standing up, if I'm doing, you know, walking around a place, whatever, like I'm not going to generally forget that it's not
right
real. There's always a part of me in my brain that is conscious of a thing not being real. I think some people somehow have the ability to completely forget that temporarily.
Yeah.
So,
you know, that makes me think of when I was playing, when I first got my VR headset and I was playing Super Hot. That was the first game I got for it.
Yeah.
I ended up getting so caught up, so immersed in the experience, that I basically played through the entire game in one go. The night that I got it, I was up till like 4 a.m. playing it. And here's the thing. It's not by any means a realistic looking game in terms of the presentation of the graphics, but I did find myself doing stuff like moving really slowly to try and evade something, or staying in place, looking around to try and gauge where I am, you know, and like so, one point where like one of the bullets is like right in front of my face, and I'm just like holding my breath, and then like, okay, thinking how can I evade this, slowly try to inch out of the way. You know, it's just like that's immersion without it being a complete suspension of disbelief, right?
I think VR is different too. I think VR can get like anybody much more immersed, but like
when done right, it can do what games do and get you so engaged that that's the vehicle for the immersion, is the engagement, right?
Yeah, but like
getting your body involved.
Non-VR games though, like I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking about it differently, but like I don't think I've ever really been like, there's a difference between immersion and like getting into something, right? Like I can get into a game to where I just play for a while or whatnot, or you know.
So when you played Sonic Frontiers, right, would you say that you got Sonic immersed Frontiers in that story? Because like the story and the characters hit right at that point in your life.
See, it's difficult.
Would you have called that immersion, or would you just say that was you were fully engaged?
Yeah, see there, it's difficult to, because I don't think that's immersion, like.
But then some people can get so immersed in a story that they can literally cry because of it. They start to actually care about these fictional characters to the point where something tragic happening to one of them can actually make them cry. We know and have known people like that. You know, I'm not naming any names, but we know.
The definition of immersion is a bit wobbly, and it's hard for me to determine.
Oh, right, because they got what we would call that as emotionally invested. Yeah. Not necessarily, but that, I feel like that is an arm of immersion, or a form of immersion.
Well, okay,
they start to feel for these characters. We've seen that happen with, like, what is it, like tabletop RPGs campaigns where they get so into character, right?
Well, I've definitely been much more like into tabletop games like that, because there's that element of like there is a real person behind every character. Now I'm more attached to the characters, but they feel more like real. They feel closer to real people.
Well, that's the thing, obviously. In multiplayer games though, there is a real person behind everything. With VTubers like ourselves, there's a real person behind our characters.
But like there's a difference though between like a tabletop RPG and a fighting game.
For sure.
You know, I don't care about the character fighting. I'm trying to win, you know. But like tabletop RPGs,
I agree with you there, because
a lot of the time it can be about the characters,
right?
And so you care about the characters.
Because I agree with you there. Like in fighting games, I want the fighting game to be a vehicle for the interplay in mind games between me and the other player.
Yeah,
right.
It's accomplishment based.
I want the game to facilitate that mental dance and then get out of the way, not be so obtuse that it stays in the way and takes me out of it. So
I think the suspension of disbelief is also
a factor.
Well, I think it's easy to misunderstand or not often like specifically defined. So here it says like it's the avoidance, often described as willing avoidance of critical thinking and logic in understanding that's something that is unreal or impossible in reality. So yeah, like it's more connected to like, okay, it's not like you forget that it's fiction.
You just don't want to.
You just ignore the parts that are. Ignore that some of the things are impossible. So like. Yeah, you know when it's not like you're actually delusional believing that the characters are real, but like you
don't care that they're not real. You're that into it.
Yeah, I guess so.
That invested, because like, so for example, like what I was gonna say earlier, and I can still tie it into this. While tinkering around with some of the sim racers, you know, trying them out without any of the assists on, right? So driving a GT3 car without anti-lock brake, you know, anti-brake lockup and traction control, or even with some of it. But like, I was trying to run around this one track, which is considered one of the hardest tracks in the world, called the Nürburgring. I think it's a German track. It has a reputation of being really tough to drive on. It's called the Green Tech. Like, it's that tough to drive. And I was trying. Okay, without assists, I can't even make a full lap without spinning out off track. It's that hard. And I'm a noob, you know, so obviously that aspect's gonna be there. But the problem is the game that it was Rennsport that I was trying it in. That game has a because it's in beta, has a very limited selection of tracks, and that's the only track that the easiest to drive vehicle class is drivable on in the online races. Oh, it's like you pair the easiest to handle cars on the hardest to drive track, you know, one of, if not the hardest to drive track in the world. And so it's just like, it's crazy. But you know what? It was super realistic that I could not make a full lap without spinning out off track. But was it fun? No, not really. Honestly, I was not having fun being unable to make a full lap, you know, without going way off and then crashing. And then I turned on all the assists to max and tried it, and it still is really hard, because I would get almost a full lap, and on the final turn they just have a really hard hairpin turn that comes up out of nowhere after you go up a hill. So it's like it comes up in your vision super fast. You have to already know it's there, basically. You have to memorize the track to be able to race it effectively. And I just, every time I would go off track, I wouldn't necessarily spin out because I had all the assists on, so I could get back on track, but it would invalidate my lap, you know, in terms of the time and the lap times and stuff and lap completion. And so it just was not fun. It took me out of the experience because of how unfun it was. I just didn't feel like doing that anymore, so I went and tried something else, you know? So it's one of those situations where realistic, absolutely. Apparently it's a laser scan track, meaning at the point that they scanned the track with these really high-tech instruments, it's a super realistic replication of a real life track. But that didn't make it any more fun to race. You know? It took turning on the unrealistic assists, right? The assists that vehicle type doesn't necessarily have to that extent, to make it a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Tolerable, but still not quite enough to be fun. But then, when I, you know, had that race with the lower spec cars, with automatic transmission, had so much fun and got to experience the thrill of racing and all the situational aspects that can arise, or at least one type of situational aspect that can arise, to the point where I got super immersed, and it was gripping, you know, and it got me more invested than the realism did. You know, that's just one of those situations. It's like, for me, realism is not paramount to immersion, and that's honestly a hill I will probably die on. As in most cases, realism is not necessary for immersion. Like you said, you have to earn the immersion. The experience has to be engaging enough that then things like realism or other aspects of the design can then create the immersion.
Yeah.
And so I think unless you're going for one-to-one with realism, product aimed at a very tiny niche that wants that, it's okay to sacrifice some realism to create more immersion. Sometimes it's necessary, or at the very least the option to do so without punishing people for doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like in my case, turning on the assist didn't punish me, but it didn't exactly make it just a breeze either, right? And so that's pretty much it, right? And I think the fighting equivalent is like easier inputs, right? Not punishing players too heavily for using them. That way they can get more engaged and, depending on the type of person, immersed in the experience, and then that in turn gets them more invested. You just earned yourself a new customer that may stick around for a while and buy more products or DLC from you, right? So it's just
it's hard for me to parse like how immersed do I get in these things, because I guess any level of like investment, like you're going to get immersed to some degree. Like
it's hard to get invested in something you're not immersed in, right? If your mind is so heavily disconnected from it that you can't be immersed, how are you going to be invested?
Yeah, like I think, like I'm just gonna be honest, I think I would like to believe that I'm Mr. Ground in reality. I'm always aware that it's not real, but I guess I do, like anyone else, get swept up in
in the moment,
feelings, emotions, the story, like if it connects to me, it also depends on like where you are at the time, and
not just physically, but mentally and emotionally.
And like I've also heard like some shows, anime, whatever, described as like the kind of shows that you can't really get into unless you're in like the right
mindset,
right like place or mindset for it to resonate. So
that makes sense. Because like, yeah, there's certain things, like certain themes and genres I just can't get into because it's not compatible with where I am in my life right now, right?
Yeah, like
I'm not over here looking for a bunch of, I don't hide the fact, I don't talk about it all the time in my content, but I don't hide the fact that I'm engaged. So I'm not exactly looking for a bunch of romance stories, It's just it's not compatible with where I am in this point of life, right?
Yeah,
it's not something that I have a need for or a desire to experience.
I mean, I've never really, I've not very often been the type of person who like intentionally seeks catharsis through things like media, entertainment, like movies, shows, music or whatever. Like, we both know people who are like, oh, when I'm angry, I listen to my angry music. When I'm sad, I listen to my sad music. Me, I'd be like, if I'm angry, I don't want to listen to angry music.
Yeah, because it's only going to perpetuate the feelings.
Be angry. Yeah, like it.
Yeah, for you, it's not an outlet. It perpetuates it.
Keeps it rare there rather than getting it out. But I guess in the rare case, I have experienced like, if I could just get kind of real for a second, I haven't been shy of mentioning like a year or two ago, I broke my wrist in an accident, and like I've mentioned, Sonic Frontiers. I was playing that while I was not able to do much, not able to go much of anywhere. I was depressed.
You're at a low
very
point,
depressed. I was at a low point, yes. So, in that case, you know, the well, spoiler, for Spy Frontiers, the ending of the game kind of, like, I don't think it was necessarily that Sage seemingly dying was so sad that it genuinely, like, got me like that. It was more like I needed to let something out there. So there's an element of resonance, and that can factor into that kind of immersion. It's like,
right,
what do you need to get out? Because if I wasn't in that place at that time, I don't think it would have gotten any
it would have hit differently.
Any tears. Yeah.
No, that makes sense, because I was enjoying and for me, my immersion in that game was because I was enjoying it so much.
I was enjoying it too.
Yeah, I was having so much fun with it that I did have the end of it did make me feel things, but it was a little different, and it was almost like a bittersweet kind of feeling, you know, that the game was over, and combined with that it ended the way it did, the you know, base story anyway, base game story, and you know, it was like some bittersweet like feelings. Like, I'm like, you can probably see in the video that I released when I finished it, I'm just like, man, you know, I just had this kind of like this feeling while the credits are going, and I'm just started talking about how I was feeling about the game at that point, and just a stream of consciousness at that moment, sharing my thoughts and my feelings about the game. And it was, yeah, it was powerful, despite not being the deepest story in games. By far, I would not say it was anywhere near the deepest or most compelling story in all of games, but it was, for the franchise, it was one of the best, I would say. And then in especially when you consider how the last, you know, 5 to 10 years of Sonic games have been, that also made it hit a certain way because of the gap in the quality, right? How much higher quality it was than what had come before it for several years.
Right.
So it just, yeah, there's a lot of circumstantial elements to it that do factor into one's immersion and investment and engagement.
Like as far as emotional emotional immersion, I think a lot of it comes down to, like, what are you primed for? You know, what are you ready to allow yourself to let a piece of media make you feel, you know? Because
makes sense.
Yeah,
no, I get you there. And yeah, that's definitely a strong factor in that as well, because for me, you know, with a lot of the stuff I do, well, it's just like you said earlier, that tied into what Reggie Fils-Aimé said, right? If it's not fun, why bother when it comes to games? So I'm going in expecting to have fun. If it's not fun, I don't get engaged and immersed.
Yeah, I have to give this example because, like, we've all seen, like, the, you know, the infomercials that come on TV that suddenly, in the arms of the angels, and all the sad animal. Yeah. Like, and like, some people might always got by that, but, like, you know, after you've seen it enough, you get, I think a lot of people get to a point where it's like,
desensitized,
oh my
by
God,
it.
Stop.
Yeah, you get desensitized, or it gets to a point where it can almost be like laughable, almost.
You're not in that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you're just not in that place. So when they suddenly try to kick you in the tear ducts,
in the fields,
like, no,
the waterworks.
I'm not there right now. Don't. You know?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, like I said, it's where you're at and what you're expecting is what it comes down to.
It's not that you don't care about the dogs, but, like, we know you've been using the same footage of the same dogs for, like, the past 10 years. Okay, it's not.
Yeah, it's also what you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're not gonna go to you're not gonna go to a Dairy Queen and want a Big Mac. You're not gonna go to a
Some people do.
Yeah, well, that's
I think
stupid.
some people do.
But that's stupid. We can say definitively that is stupid. You're not going to go to, you shouldn't go to a McDonald's and or was it a Taco Bell and want some McDonald's fries. Like, yeah, there's a measure of realistic expectations and unrealistic expectations in an objective sense. That does also factor into the circumstances and the elements that can be expected to create immersion.
Yeah, because
you're not going to Flight Simulator and expecting a story of political intrigue and betrayal. Right?
you could go to a steakhouse, order something. You know, you want a big nice steak. You've been waiting for this, and then they bring you out like a really fancy salad.
Yeah,
you're like, I ordered a steak. No, but this is a really good salad. Yeah, like, I don't care how good the salad is. I ordered steak.
You're not gonna be sitting there eating the salad and be like, this is the best.
This is good steak.
Yeah, exactly. I love that example.
How good it is. It's not what I wanted.
That's perfect. No, that is absolutely perfect. Oh man.
I'm not sure how much that applies. I just wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, no, immersion matters to an extent like that, right? You can't. It matters as much as your expectations match what is being presented.
Yeah.
And as much as the circumstances also just line up to give you that immersion. I think that's the extent of it all. Immersion is important, but it's not everything. Right? And it has to be earned, like we said. You don't just get to say, we're going to throw away all, fun factor in pursuit of realism, and then say, well, you're dumb if you're not immersed in this. Right?
Yeah, because now we're just getting into we're getting a bit into left field again, I think.
But it's just one of those things, it's
yeah.
Immersion's important, but it's not everything. It has to be earned, and there's a lot more that factors into it than just things like one thing like realism or what have you. It's a kind of a combination of engagement, believability, and enjoyment, I think, is what coalesces into immersion.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way to summarize it, actually. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we're pretty much done with this discussion. Otherwise, we'll just keep going in circles. So definitively, we made some definitive statements too. So if you agree with us, let us know in the comments or on Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, with the hashtag CounterPickPod, all together as one word.
I might not remember what I said, so remind me.
You can also well, there you go. If you want to clip it and then go ahead. Yeah, and then you can also at me at s_factor_sam, same as you'll see on whatever platform that you're currently watching or listening to this on. And you can also at saiprim, SAIPRIME, no underscores or anything of that sort. So, feel free to hit us up in the comments or on social media, and let us know what you think. Do you agree with everything we said? Do you disagree with anything we said?
Do you agree with some things we said? Do you agree with none of what we said?
Are you angered by what we said? If so, try to be at least civilized. Does what we said make you sad? Does what we said make you immerse?
Oh God. I'm being stupid. Okay, so don't worry about it.
But yeah, just let us know what you think and what you feel about this topic. We love hearing more perspectives than just ours. We try to be varied in our own perspectives, but we still do have our own, notions and biases, so we like hearing from other people. So let us hear your voice. All right, well, next episode will be next month. The live broadcast of it will be on the last Saturday, so that'll be August 31st. Saturday, August 31st, 3 p.m. Eastern time zone. And you can join us live and type your thoughts on the topic in chat. to chime in on the discussion. We actually acknowledge all messages on here to the best of our ability, and they're also included in the video version of the podcast, which goes up on the Wednesday following the live broadcast, both in video form and on all the audio only platforms. So, all right, hope you enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe or follow on whatever your platform of choice is, and join us in the next one. Hope you have a great rest of your day. That's it from me. So this is s-factor-sam and
saiprim
signing out. We'll see you next time.
Later.